Well, all right. Welcome, everybody. Another episode of Legend Sports Amplifying. We're talking baseball history and Negro League history, card art, collecting, you name it, whatever your passion is for sports. And today, I am really, really happy to have on April Matthis from Toni Stone. How are you, April?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm doing well. So this is another avenue I'm kind of stepping into here, right? Because I told you I've had on historians, as we were talking before we got on. I've had on trying to tell the stories, give the context to the Negro Leagues after the recent announcements, and I've had on historians, I've had on authors, researchers, artists, card artists that were part of the Josh Gibson campaign, documentary filmmakers, and now my first time to speak with someone who's done live theater involved with the Negro Leagues. I think this is awesome. I really, really do. So you,
Yeah, what to do?
so you, I think I mentioned to you, I love to hear people's origin stories and how they got to where they are today. And so tell us a little bit about how you got into theater and acting and what brought you to the Toni Stone part and today.
All right. Well, I'm originally from Texarkana, Texas, so it's about as far away from uh, the theater, the Roundabout Theater in New York City as you can get,
Hmm.
uh, at least in the stateside. And I grew up kind of play acting at home with my family members. Never really thought of it as a profession, but I loved TV. I loved watching performance. I loved doing what I now realize was improv as a child. I had elaborate play with my Barbies, and I would like write dialogue and things like that, but never had any formal acting training. And I actually went to UT Austin as an English major, and I always say that that was a good foundation for me getting into performing live theater because my career has mostly been working with new playwrights like Lydia Diamond, uh, living playwrights, I mean, who write new plays for the theater.
Hmm.
And so, yeah, I actually, at the end of my studies at UT, took a performance studies class that was cross referenced with like women's studies and English and performance studies, I think. And that really kind of like finally got me to explore what I called at the time like the ham part of myself,
Hmm.
the part of me that like only my immediate family knew because I was mostly perceived as kind of like a shy, quiet kid. But
Hmm.
I did have this performative impulse in me. And so I took this class that kind of like looked at performance from an art perspective, and um, that kind of opened my mind and gave me the courage to start auditioning for the community theater that was available in Austin, Texas.
Cool.
And so I started working at these community theaters in Austin. And within a year, I had worked with a lot of the theaters that were really doing exciting work, like Zachary Scott Theater, Salvage Vanguard Theater,
Awesome.
uh, the Rude Mechanicals. And from there, I made the move to New York because I had a connection with someone that I met in the theater community. And so I started doing theater in New York City. And that's really, how I became a professional actor. I got my equity card. And the way Toni Stone came about was Pam McKinnon was the director at the time, and they'd been workshopping Toni Stone for years. They had been in development.
Hmm.
Lydia Diamond, the playwright, worked closely with Martha Ackerman in adapting her book,
Hmm.
which is the one biography we have about Toni Stone called Curveball.
Hmm.
Great book, great
Hmm.
resource. And Lydia was approached by Samantha Berry, who is a huge baseball fan and the original producer of this show. And she and Pam McKinnon, the director, got together and conceived of this show and brought in Lydia Diamond, this Broadway award-winning playwright, to tell the story of this, the first woman to play professional baseball, not even just Black woman, but the first woman to play professionally with men happened to be a Black woman in the Negro Leagues. And so Pam brought me in to do just like reading, because originally it was cast with Udo Azuba from Orange is the New Black. And she actually was not able to do the production. And so they asked me to step in when she became unavailable. And
Wow.
yeah, so you just never know how these things happen.
Right.
And so I ended up being cast in the production of it. And so we did it at the Roundabout Theater in 2019.
Awesome. Well, congratulations. I mean, I think, boy, that's probably a story that happens more often than people think, right? I mean, sometimes you have to, the opportunity presents itself, and sometimes it's in some strange ways. You never know. And you ended up winning an Off-Broadway and Obie Award for that. Now, none of those were done live, obviously, right, with the pandemic. I mean, so how did they present those awards? How did they go about doing that?
Well, the Obie Awards in particular are different than all the other awards. You don't attend the ceremony unless you're going to win something. So you get invited to the ceremony and you're not sure why exactly, especially if you've been in more than one production that season, because this is actually my second Obie Award. I got one of 5 years prior for they called it Sustained Excellence of Performance. So that was one that was kind of like a catch-all, like, we like you, we like the work that you've been doing over the years here in New York off-Broadway scene. And so I figured it was for Toni Stone when I got the kind of invitation to attend the Obie Awards virtual ceremony in 2020. And then I was told that it was because I was winning an Obie Award for my performance in Toni Stone.
Awesome.
And so they asked me to write, to make a video of an acceptance speech. And it's funny because there was also a lot of nominations that award season that were not guaranteed. So I wrote, I ended up writing a lot of like acceptance speeches that, I didn't, but the Obie is kind of a guaranteed thing. So if they come contacting you, it's because you've won.
You won something. So this part, did you have a background? Did you play sports at all growing up as a kid? Did you have a background? No?
I did not.
You were. So how difficult, or how did you go about preparing for a part that you're going to be playing someone who is athletic? Because Toni Stone, I mean, she was more than just a baseball player. I mean, she was a fantastic athlete in many other sports, and was from a very young age. So how did you go about preparing for that?
Yeah, she lettered in several sports. She also did figure skating. I think she excelled in tennis. Like a lot of Negro Leagues players, like Jackie Robinson, like baseball was like his third or fourth sport.
Only four, or Letterman athlete at UCLA, I believe, right? Ever in the history of the school, Jackie Robinson. Yeah.
I mean, I'm sure a lot of people know a lot more than I do about that. But what I did, I think, because it was a play about a person who follows her ambition and her passion at a time when that is the last thing that's expected of someone who looks like her. I think I tapped into that, like the real core of what Lydia, the playwright, was trying to get at about who this person is. So it wasn't going to be just like a dry, biography on stage. It was like, what drives this person? She was someone who grew up in like a middle class African American family in a predominantly African American community called the Rondo in Minneapolis. And, her family owned a hair salon. And so she was kind of expected to excel, maybe academically, which she struggled with. And she was, encouraged to play more feminine sports, which is why she, was encouraged to do tennis and figure skating. But she had a passion for baseball, and she wanted to play professionally. Like, she wanted to wear the professional uniform. She didn't want to wear a skirt. She didn't want to, learn like the girly version. Like, she wanted to learn baseball. And so I, dove into the biography that we have, Curveball by Martha Ackerman, which was just a great resource for us. And we happened to have Martha available in rehearsal at the beginning. So she was just a great resource. There's not a lot of footage on Toni Stone, so I looked at that. And we weren't going to actually be playing games live. I mean, because you can imagine, like, the ball goes once into the audience, like that's going to be. So we had the advantage of this brilliant choreographer, Camille A. Brown, who choreographed like dance, like baseball, like movement. And there are 8 of us on stage, all male actors except for myself. So the ensemble is mostly male actors who have varying experiences in sports. So some people had familiarity with baseball, others not so much. So that made me feel like I wasn't the, odd, as it were. But we did have this great coach that came in, Coach Mack, that coaches kids from Little League on up toward, like, real baseball technique. We had that. I had other coaches come in and work with me on my swing and my stance. We actually had a chance to go to the Mets dugout, and I met Robinson Cano, second baseman, and talked to him about, like, stance and movement. And I took myself to the batting cages.
Awesome.
Years, and, like, just worked on myself. Had a couple friends come help me out and just really, like, get me comfortable with the physicality of that. And that was something that I kept going back to throughout the run of the production. It's like working on my physicality and working on, particularly what we see Toni do in the show is not so much run the bases, but we see her hit, and so that was important to me, that look right. Awesome. And so that was a lot of the preparation.
I know, just in watching some of the footage of it and the trailers online on YouTube, the thing that really impressed me the most about watching it was, like you just pointed out, right? You can't have a ball flying around inside of a theater, but yet you're trying to portray an outdoor sport that has a ball flying around. And the way it was done and choreographed, you have the impression of a baseball game. You get the energy, you get the movements, you get all of that. And it's really, really fun. Maybe in a few minutes down the road here, I'd like to just play that 1-minute clip so people could see that, because it really is impressive. I think it's amazing. Obviously, I haven't seen it yet, but I did hear coming up, I think the end of this month, there's going to be a virtual streaming of it during the Nationals game in Washington. If anybody, I'm not sure if they're streaming that online or just at the game.
There's going to be a simulcast at Nationals Park on September the 27th at 7:30.
Cool.
And that's with Arena Stage. So I think you can go to their website.
Now, is that going to be just at the game that they're going to stream it, or is that going to be streamed online?
I would go to check the website to find more information.
I think it's going to be fun.
arenastage.org. And I'm actually not in that production, so you'll see a different Toni Stone. But okay. It's the same team that is part of the original production.
Awesome.
the same director, same playwright, and she actually did some rewrites from that original version that we did.
Awesome.
So it's definitely worth checking out.
Absolutely, I definitely will. The one thing that I've tried to convey, and like I mentioned to you before we got on here, with the announcements that Major League Baseball made, long overdue, to recognize the Negro Leagues as major leagues. And then Baseball Reference is a site that compiles statistics. They are now including them in there. And people, a lot of people ask that I know that some of them are baseball fans. They're asking a lot of questions. So that's why I've been trying to have these kinds of conversations with the people who have been involved in this for a long, long time. But, one of the things that you're well aware of, and I'm not sure what your knowledge of the Negro Leagues was before this role, but the only reason these guys could not play in Major League Baseball was simply because of the color of their skin. The racism, the Jim Crow of the time, they were good enough, and they certainly could have played, and they certainly would have been stars, many of them.
Yeah, I would say that even good enough is an understatement, because these were
stars
that changed the game.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
They went to Japan, and this is, yes, you're right. There's very little I knew about the Negro Leagues other than name before I got involved, but I learned so much since from Bob Kendrick, who's the
You had
president.
a good teacher there for sure, yeah.
Exactly. Negro Leagues Baseball Museum, where I got this Kansas City Monarchs hat.
Oh, I have mine somewhere. I should have brought it over.
Yeah, Tony played for the Monarchs too. Yeah, the Negro Leagues actually went to Japan in the 30s and taught them, the American way to play the game, which was like a lot faster, a lot of power. Like there's that famous story. Is it Josh Gibson that he could, or is it Buck O'Neill that he could be in bed, he could turn off the light switch and be in
Cool Papa Bell.
Oh, that's Cool Papa
Cool
Bell.
Papa Bell, yeah.
Yeah, so, and those things, whether or not that's an exaggeration, but people like Buck O'Neill, I'd say, yeah, they rival your Babe Ruth, your name your baseball Hall of Famer.
Yeah. They all have that. It's so funny in being a baseball fan, and like I said, I was telling you before I got on here, turns out I only knew half the story till I met some of these guys back in 1992. But yeah, they all were these, this Pop Lloyd was the black Honus Wagner, and I'm just going to throw a few out there. And so they all had that. Josh Gibson was the black Babe Ruth. No. That conversation, people need to stop saying that. They were stars in their own right, and they didn't need to have that type of comparison. But the thing that Toni Stone was facing, though, and I'm sure you're well aware of this as well. The All-American Girls League was playing, and I've had on Professor Adrian Burgos, Leslie Heafy, we've talked a little bit about Annika Orrock, who have done some work on that, but they faced the same prejudices and racism as well. I mean, there were very, very few. If you looked the part, right, if you were light-skinned kind of thing, you could play, right? But she did not have an opportunity to play in even the All-American Girls League.
Yeah, I didn't know any light-skinned blacks that were playing for the All-American Girls League.
No, there were a couple, I think, that were Hispanic that were playing, but that was it. And so she was facing not only the racism of the time, but the sexism of the time as well. How did you portray? Is that portrayed in the play? I mean, how was that handled?
It does come up, because a lot of people ask questions, especially of the time, of how safe is it because before she started playing professionally with the Indianapolis Clowns, she would go on these barnstorming tours with these amateur or farm teams because she just wanted to play. And she befriended a lot of older men that I think weren't interested in her romantically, and that kind of maybe provided some protection for her, because there are accounts that she did face physical and sexual harassment by some of the male players that she would encounter. I mean, either just flat out disdain or like sexual violence. And there's a story in the book where she was being harassed on a bus trip, and she complained to the manager about it, and the manager was like, what do you want me to do? Handle it yourself. Mm-hmm. And when the guy went to sleep, she took a baseball bat and handled it herself.
That's the way to do it.
I wanted that in the show, but we have an encounter that implies that, because mostly we follow her with the clowns. So there's one encounter on a bus late at night where, or there are a couple where she's kind of, either harassed because people are jealous of her or because they want to pose a sexual threat to her. And, there's something to be said about how Toni Stone presented in regular life. Like, she was not girly. She never wanted to wear a skirt. Mm-hmm. And that was one of her stipulations of joining the clowns, is that she wasn't going to be like their girl show mascot. She wanted to wear the same uniform that the men wore. She insisted on that. And she, would wear men's clothing in real life. And she married a man much older than her, Aurelius Alberga. And he was like 30-something years her senior. I mean, some people might suggest that maybe that wasn't a romantic partnership, but more a partnership of convenience. We're not really sure.
Interesting.
But I think it definitely suggests that an older man might not expect her to stay home and bear children for him.
Interesting.
And, she was able to have her career and be a married woman at the same time. So it was a delicate dance that she was doing with her life, as far as like navigating gender and sexism alongside the racism.
Interesting. Yeah, that's the triple whammy, I guess. Then, yeah, absolutely. And I've had on several researchers, authors who have done some work on women in baseball. It goes back a long ways. I mean, there was women playing baseball back into the 1800s. I'm going to have an author on in the next couple of weeks who did a book on the Dolly Vardens, which was a baseball team in Philadelphia that was a male team but also a female team, and she wrote a book that's intended more for children, younger audience. So it's going to be a lot of fun talking about that. But there is a history of women in baseball. And then what happens today, though, right? As a woman, a girl growing up, you could play baseball. There are plenty of girls who have excelled, the Little League World Series, things like that. Now they get to high school, though, and they're forced to play softball. There's no most of the time, or into college. So there's some talk about that changing, which would be great. I don't see why not. I think one sport, baseball, is a sport that certainly could be competitive, because all shapes and sizes and skill sets are key to a baseball team. There's not the stereotypical you have to be tall if you're in basketball, or that kind of thing. So it would be nice to see. It really, really would. So what does Toni Stone do? Are you familiar at all? After she gets out of playing baseball, which she played through the 50s, what does she do after that?
I think she coached like some amateur teams in, I believe, on the West Coast, like where they ended up living. I think she fought for a long time for her legacy to be recognized, like within the Negro Leagues. So I know she, was very honored when she was accepted into like the Negro Leagues Hall of Fame. And I think she kept baseball active in her life as much as she did, but she also did end up caring for her husband who lived like past 100 years
Oh,
old. And,
wow.
like she would go visit him uh, in the nursing home like every day.
Wow.
And she herself actually didn't live nearly that long. I think she died in her 70s. But yeah, I think baseball was always a part of her life somehow. I mean, there are pictures of her like in the 70s throwing out the first pitch, at um, some game, and there was like a park dedicated to her in her hometown. So
She finally got a little bit of honor, a little bit of her due in '93 was when she finally gets inducted into the Women's Baseball Hall of Fame, the International Women's Baseball Hall of Fame, which is again something that was probably long overdue, like many things that we're talking about here. But so you did get to go and learn from some of the best. What was it like when you went to the museum in Kansas City? Tell us about how that was, because you're coming from a perspective of someone who I'm assuming you weren't, if you didn't play, you probably weren't much of a sports fan without the knowledge of the Negro Leagues. What was that like to go to the Baseball Hall of Fame in Kansas City, Negro League
I
Baseball
mean, it's a treasure
Museum?
trove. It's
Hmm.
like, just seeing that not only are there like Black professional athletes that have been playing for decades, but they're team owners. There's like all these different teams, there's these different franchises, like the uniforms, the costumes, like the stats of how amazing these players actually were,
Hmm.
how amazing these teams were, like the speed, the alacrity.
Hmm.
Uh, it just, it was, it was fascinating. And, like, I felt like I barely scratched the surface. Like we were there for a couple hours,
Hmm.
I could go back for weeks and weeks and learn more and more.
Hmm.
And yeah, I mean, just listening to Bob, he's his own
Oh,
museum
yeah.
contained in a human body.
Hmm.
Yeah, I mean, and they even were saying like the Black women in baseball exhibit they had was relatively new to their history, and
Hmm.
they were still gathering more about uh, uh, Mamie Johnson and Connie Morgan.
Hmm.
So yeah, there's
All
just so much to learn.
all of these stories are so important in the context of it all, because like we've been talking about, I mean, simple reason that they weren't able to play was because of a color barrier that the owners had put up. It was against them on so many fronts. The press at the time, the commissioner of the sport, so many things and yet they still persevered. And that's really the story, I think, of the Negro Leagues that is important. That despite everything that was thrown at them and against them, they continued and they persevered and they started. And when they came in, like you pointed out, when they came into Major League Baseball, after Jackie Robinson, for the next decade, they were the stars of the sport. I mean, they were most valuable players, and they won pitching awards, Cy Young awards, and they were all stars. And they didn't just spring out of the earth out of nowhere. They were learning it in the Negro Leagues, and then they came to Major League Baseball and changed the sport. They really, really did.
So that's the thing. It's like I wish I could have gotten to see a Negro Leagues game because like I think we have. I mean, and modern baseball is completely different.
Hmm.
Like what people are able to do physically, whether or not they have physical enhancements, that's a whole other conversation that
Hmm.
uh, just listening to. But the way that the Negro Leagues games are described, if you have the best of the best
Hmm.
playing this game that has been forged on its own terms, like I just can't imagine how thrilling those
Hmm.
games.
Amazing, right? And there isn't a lot of footage. I imagine there's hardly any of trying to do some research on your role for Toni Stone. There probably isn't much of her, let alone the Negro Leagues in general. So that had to make it a little
Yeah,
bit more
I
difficult.
mean, but what little you do see, I mean, like the Indianapolis Clowns, for example,
Right.
they were also expected to do this kind of like sideshow
Hmm.
stuff, which we bring up in the play,
You
which
know,
is why it also is essential to have a choreographer. Uh, there's some things that, now we would recognize in somebody, a team like the Harlem Globetrotters, like this
hmm
kind of showmanship and like,
hmm
doing tricks with the balls and the bats, but like incorporating that into the skill of the game is like a whole other world of like,
you
how
know,
beautiful and
mhm.
was this game to watch.
It's interesting you said that. I remember as a kid growing up in the '70s, the clowns came to. I grew up in Northeast PA, just north of Philadelphia. They came
Oh,
there, and my dad took me to go see them, and it was it was the show, right? And I think in a lot of ways that got put in people's heads that that's all that the Negro Leagues were about, and that's not true at all. It became maybe more of that into the as the league once Jackie Robinson came in, the league began to spiral down. It continued on into the '60s, but it made I think it put it in people's heads that that was what it was all about, and it's not. And that's maybe one unfortunate thing about it, but about that aspect of the vaudeville kind of showmanship because
yeah.
it took maybe a little bit away from the skill that all the players had prior to them.
And
So
that's something that we treat in the play too, like how much of it is minstrelsy and how much of it is like actual skill. And, you
okay,
know, there's a
cool,
struggle with like, you know, who are we doing this for exactly and why?
interesting.
For
Yeah,
whose benefit are we doing this? But for me, what I take away from it is, you don't know what I can do with this ball. Like, like I can do the clown show if you want, and I can knock this out of the park.
hmm
And that just speaks to the athleticism of the players. And
hmm
yeah.
You mentioned that earlier, and that's something that Bob. I remember him telling me a long time ago. These guys could have played any sport. I mean, they were athletes that could have played in any sport, but baseball was the only opportunity to make any money. The other sports were kind of like in their fledgling stages, professional football, professional basketball. So you can make money. And barnstorming, some of these guys made a decent amount of money and made probably more money traveling around to play at various stadiums than they did for their actual, player contracts that they may have had. So it's interesting. I don't think they get the credit for spreading the game around the country, around the continent, like they should, because they did. One of the things I tried to point out on here is just people, if they looked around, odds are sometime or another their area, their town, their city had a barnstorming tour come through, a team play there, their local team played, and so if they looked, they could find it. They really, really could. So do you mind? I wanted to really put that up to let people see that little 1 minute trailer, I guess you could call. So
Yeah.
I'm gonna go ahead and put that up because I think that it's really you need people need to see it because it really conveys the kind of the excitement, the atmosphere of that show. I think it's really, really cool. So let me just put this up here. Okay. All right, here we go. This is that. I think it's a minute and two long. So I think people would like to see this.
I want to tell you something about reaching and me. Because you may have heard, I am the first woman to ever play professional ball. out between the weight of a thing and the reach, there's breath. And in that breath is life.
Awesome. That is awesome. I love it. I think, boy, oh boy, you just watching that, like I said, the thing that, the thing that I really enjoy, just even about that 1 minute little blurb, is that it just gives the energy of that show so nice. I mean, I don't know. Just tell us whatever you think about that experience. What was that like on that stage? Because I told you this before I got on here. I had many friends who were into theater, and I had friends of mine who played baseball with, who were they were theater majors at Penn State. And I tell you what, I have all the respect in the world for people who get up on a stage, because it is not easy.
You know, I think the least easy part of it for me, particularly for that show, was walking out at the beginning by myself and addressing the audience with no props, no real, nobody behind me, no sound, no music, just like spotlight me talking to the audience, like telling them about the game. And
awesome.
That opening monologue, and it's been a little while, so I don't have it memorized anymore, but it's about the weight of the ball in your hand, essentially. And Martha Ackerman, Toni's biographer, said when she read that monologue that Lydia had written for Toni, that she knew that she got it. And you know, I had a lot of baseball players come up to me and say, like, you know, I really felt that, like, you know, it's the feeling of just feeling the ball in your hand, and knowing what to do with it, that kind of like tactile memory, muscle memory that you have, and the relationship you have with the weight of the ball. And it's kind of like a metaphor for life, and like an approach to, like a life philosophy through the sport. And that, I think, is what's most interesting to me about athletes and sports, is kind of like the philosophical aspect of, like, you know, it's not just putting a ball here or doing this with a ball. It's like, what is that relationship about reaching? And we talk a lot in the play. We go back to like the space between the weight and the reach for the ball is where life is, and the human experience. And I think a lot of like films about baseball and things like that get into like, how is baseball a metaphor for life?
It's used a lot, right? It really is used a lot.
There's a lot of connections there. And for me, it was always finding that connection with the audience, because you never know, like, how big is the house? Like, how many people do we have tonight? Like, are they baseball fans? Are they theater fans? Like, what are they expecting this night to be? Like, are there kids in the audience? Are there mostly older people? Like, you know, are there mostly white people in the audience? Are there black people in the audience and other people of color? Like, you know, we're going to talk about racism, you know, because it's, you can't extract it from the baseball story, as you have been saying. Like, you know, racism is part of America's history. It's part of history. And baseball is part of American history. Like, so there's no way we're not going to talk about it. And, you know, that was the hardest part, was like coming out and setting the tone for, I'm just talking to you. I'm talking about like this metaphysical, philosophical way of thinking about the game. And once we got through that, and then like the guys came out behind me one by one, and then we start, like, you see them doing all that beautiful movement, and then like the play kind of gets started. Once we're in scenes, I'm fine. Because then it's just like, oh, she's in the situation of she's at her first game and she's like, people are making jokes and she doesn't really jokes, you know, or like she's disappointed because she struck out and people are thinking it's because she's a girl, not because she just had a bad day like anybody, you know. And playing the scene is always like easier for me as an actor. But yeah, like I felt like I had a handle of the show when I could come out at the beginning and like feel like I knew the attack, like I knew how to start the show. That was like the bulk of my work.
Boy, that's a great point, because how often, I bet you, that happens. You know, everybody's got an agenda, right? Whenever they make any comments or they talk about this or that. And so, yeah, you're right. Everybody's entitled to a bad day, a bad at bat, a bad game, and you don't need to shape it into something or the other. I mean, it just is what it is sometimes, and like I said, I can't even imagine. I like I said, I played, I coached for many years, and it's one thing to be able to rely on something you've been doing since I was a little kid, to go out on that field and yeah, maybe the first pitch or two you get a little butterflies, you get that out of your system, you're playing the sport. But as an actor on a stage, you have to remember all of your movements, all of your lines. I have all the respect in the world for you guys. I'll tell you, that is not easy.
That's kind of like, that becomes like rote recall. Like that's your body at a certain point. And really the hardest thing for me to memorize were the stats, because, and we spent a lot of time, like for the longest time, the playwright had put like fake stats in. And I was like, this is a lot of numbers, because we were told that like Toni Stone had this like encyclopedic knowledge of like baseball statistics, because she was a great student of baseball. Like it was, that was like where her academic brain excelled, because it was something that grabbed her. And, the playwright took that information and made it into a device in the play of like, when she gets nervous or stressed out, she will just start quoting stats, like, Cool Papa Bell stats, or like Josh Gibson, or whoever it was. And so we had like some dramaturgy work done to find out what stats would Toni be aware of, at that time. So we had to be very specific to like, 20s, 30s, 40s. And I had to rattle these things off. And that was the toughest thing to get down, because it was the last thing to learn, because they were written late in the process. Like, like learning my monologue was not even as tricky as learning those stats and being able to rattle them off. And so I had my own like, mnemonics for like memorizing numbers in certain orders, like someone's RBI, like at bats, all of these statistics, and they're in my brain somewhere. Like give me 2 days and like I'll have them back. But like, I think people always are like, how do you memorize all those lines? It's like, you don't think about it after a while. But that I did have to think about, because it's not like a moment, it's pure data.
Is there any point in there? I'm sure you had to do some ad-libbing at some point in there. Was there anything? No,
I never ad-libbed. No, this wasn't that kind of play. It was so tight,
Cool.
And, there were some times where I would be like, people would joke like, oh, well, you could just make up statistics. Like nobody's going to know. But it was important to me to be accurate. And, like, it's true that for some of the barnstorming games, like maybe records weren't kept that well. Right. And so like the statistics that we have access to might not be right anyway, always. But I wanted to make sure that there's a scene where Toni Stone is negotiating her deal with Sidney Pollack for her contract with the clowns, and he's kind of lowballing her, and so she like lists her stats and she'll pay me what I'm worth. And so I always had to make sure that I got those right, because like those are Toni Stone's stats, you know, like her stats. She had a 364 batting average, you know.
Awesome. You know, one of the reasons, and I think I might have mentioned this to you before we got on here, that the next generation has to take this forward. There were so many, I'm doing this because there's so many people who have been authors, historians, researchers that have been doing this for a long, long time. And who knows, if they didn't keep the stories alive, what conversations will be going on, if the decisions are made that happened the last year happen yet, who knows? But you know, 2020 was kind of the perfect storm of things. You know, the unfortunately, you know, what happened with George Floyd raised a lot of recognition to issues, and then it's the 100th anniversary of the Negro National League, and it's just kind of, if they weren't going to do it then, when were they? But the next generation now has to get, and I've been trying to have on younger people to get gauge their interest, to take these stories and continue, because there's more out there. There's a lot more to be found and told, and that's why I think talking to you and seeing how people can find lots of different ways to tell these stories, and I think it's important that the next generation starts to pick up that torch, I guess, so to speak. So
yeah, and I think it, you know, as far as I can understand, there can be more outreach to communities that haven't had access to baseball, because it is expensive, you know, to have the coaching and to join like the summer programs and you know, the equipment and the uniform and all of that. I think that's why, as far as I understand, we have seen less African American representation these days in baseball. And you know, there are so many more resources into basketball and football, so it would be great if that could be something that the baseball community like really takes on. Is like, how do we make this affordable and accessible to kids that are underrepresented and don't have access to this? And like, I think the history is a big piece of that. It's like, this sport belongs to you. There's a legacy of doing it. Here's how you can do it. Here's how we can bring you into the game and keep this game alive and interesting. Because you know, as I understand, like interest in the sport has waned in the past.
It has. Yeah, Major League Baseball, I think, could do a little better job at that outreach. There's recently, this past year, the Players Alliance, it's called, is a group of Major League Baseball players that are going to different cities and trying to raise that awareness, distribute equipment, do what they can. I think it just started this past year with the pandemic, so hopefully it continues. So
that's great.
So what are you working on now? Are you doing anything now?
Yeah, I'm actually about to go to the Philadelphia Festival with a theater company that I've worked with for over a decade called, the theater company is called Elevator Repair Service, but it's a theater company. And it's a funny story of why that's the name. It was the artistic director. He took a career aptitude test, and that's what he would be good at. So he thought, okay, I'll do theater, but I'll name it Elevator Repair Service. So we're doing this show called Baldwin Buckley at Cambridge, and it's about this historic debate at Cambridge University between James Baldwin and William F. Buckley about the American dream, and the proposition is the American dream at the expense of the American Negro. So very germane to this conversation. And I'm kind of like a surprise character. Lorraine Hansberry, who was a dear friend of James Baldwin's, who passed away the winter before this historic debate in 1964, I believe. they were close friends. So she appears in this piece. So that's going up at the Philly Fringe Festival, September 9th through 11th. Tickets are on sale now at Philly Fringe. And I'm also going to be on an episode of this TV show called Evil on CBS.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah.
My wife and I watch that we watch it, yeah.
Well,
when are you going to be on?
September 12th.
When are you going to be on?
A familiar face. September 12th. The episode is called U is for UFO, and cool. I play a fighter pilot. So.
Awesome. Yeah, we would definitely look for you. My wife and I watched that. Awesome. Very, very cool. So I see you got your Monarchs hat on. I'm guessing you got that at the museum when you were down there, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Are you a little bit more of a baseball fan now, or
I follow it more. I haven't actually been able to be at a game yet since the pandemic. Mm-hmm. I am looking forward to that when I feel like our COVID numbers are a little better here in New York City. But I also have this great.
You got your clown's hat. Cool.
But it was cool before the pandemic. Like my husband and son and I were able to go to a Cyclones game, the Brooklyn Cyclones.
Yeah, cool.
And I got to throw out the first pitch at that game, which was super fun. And
that's awesome. Awesome. Very cool.
And they gave me an award, and they promoted the show, which was great.
Awesome.
But I have more of an appreciation for it, but I don't have a television. I haven't owned a television in almost 2 decades now. So most of my stuff I see is online, and it's hard to catch stuff live. But I'd rather go see a baseball game.
Mm-hmm.
So I just looking forward to when I feel better about doing big, crowded events, and I would like to go to another game.
Awesome. We're with you on that. Yeah, it's my wife's a school teacher, so boy, oh boy, I'm down here in Texas, so she's dealing with all of that. Yeah, so every day when she comes home, I make sure I give her a hug and say, boy, oh boy, I'm just glad you got everything is okay, because it's anyway, I don't want to get into that, but it
my
is.
sisters are teachers in Texas too, so I
understand. Yeah. Oh well. April, thank you so much. This was great. This was a lot of fun. I appreciate you taking the time. Best of luck with everything. Break a leg, I guess. Is that what you still? They still say that in the theater?
You can break your leg on Zoom. So thank you so much. It was a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you. You have a great day. Be safe.
Thank you. You too. Bye-bye.